Some of you maybe write poetry or listen to poetry. I think I recognize that many of you do. Are any of you Ghostmusters? You know what that is, right? Ghostmusters are the opposite of Ghostbusters. They muster the ghosts. There's an app for that. You don't need to have your cell phone on. So you can turn your phones off if you haven't already. I think I'll do that. There you go. My Ghostbuster app is still going to work. So it's sort of like a seance, but we're not in a circle. You know, in a circle we would hold hands and there would be incense and a crystal ball and such. So in this geometry, the invitation to deadness arriving is a little bit different. So I want you to practice a little bit. So to think of each of your fingers as moving independently, kind of stir the air. It's best to have your eyes sort of half closed. And I heard somebody, there's a Ghostbuster here. That's correct. You make a ooh sound while you're doing this. Yeah, and there are other things. Now, if some poets here are a little bit uncomfortable, so just go ahead and recite poetry while we're doing that. That also helps dead poets to arrive. And if your neighbor is doing all of those things, then just clap when they're done. Okay, so let's give it a try. Waldo! Ralph Waldo Emerson! How transcendental is that?
Thank you. Good evening to you all. I am Waldo Emerson, and I'm very happy to find myself here in the Waldo Hills. I would like to think that the shared name ties us together across time and space, but I regret to say it is a mere coincidence. Your Daniel Waldo was my contemporary, but I didn't know him. He was a native of Virginia, whereas I was born in Boston. There was a great divide between the northern colonies and the southern that I understand prevails to this very day. Daniel and I may not have shared roots in the old country, but I can proudly say that we were both Americans through and through. So, a little lecture about myself. Good evening, come in. I was born in 1803, the second of 5 sons who survived into adulthood. My father died when I was 8, and I was raised by my mother with help from my father's sister, Mary Moody Emerson. Aunt Mary was a powerful intellect with powerfully original ideas. She influenced my thinking profoundly, and she made sure that I and 2 of my brothers graduated from Harvard College. I was the class poet. I seem to have been born to speak in public, Emerson's having been preachers in America for generations. My father was a prominent Unitarian minister, and it fell to me to follow in his footsteps. Accordingly, I suffered some lectures at the Harvard Divinity School and directed my extensive reading to the matter. And in 1829, I took the pulpit of the Second Church in Boston. I married a beautiful young woman, my Ellen, born Ellen Tucker, and was a made man. Still, I could not stop myself thinking and reading and listening to the new ideas that were then coming to America from Scotland and Germany. My mind was on fire. I found I was not comfortable with the established pieties of the church, but sought a more immediate personal experience of divinity. Alas, after only 2 years of blissful marriage and much unbearable suffering nobly borne, my darling Ellen succumbed to tuberculosis. Soon after this tragic loss, I concluded that I could no longer offer communion to a congregation that seemed to value it only as a customary rite. True religion is to be found in direct intercourse between God and the individual, which is more likely to occur in the field and forest than within church walls. So I resigned my ministry and preached after that in the form of lectures, of which I wrote and read out more than 1,500 through the many years of my life. The essays I drew from them, I believe, have survived to this day and had some influence. Well, this is an evening of poetry, I understand, not of history or biography, so I will now read you a poem that I wrote in these early days. Each and all. Little thinks in the field yon red-cloaked clown of thee from the hilltop looking down. The heifer that lows in the upland farm, far heard, lows not thine ear to charm. The sexton tolling his bell at noon deems not that great Napoleon stops his horse and lists with delight, whilst his files sweep round yon alpine height. Nor knowest thou what argument thy life to thy neighbor's creed has lent. All are needed by each one, nothing is fair or good alone. I thought the sparrow's note from heaven, singing at dawn on the alder bough. I brought him home in his nest at even. He sings the song, but it pleases not now. For I did not bring home the river and sky. He sang to my ear, they sang to my eye. The delicate shells lay on the shore, the bubbles of the latest wave fresh pearls to their enamel gave. And the bellowing of the savage sea greeted their safe escape to me. I wiped away the weeds and ferns and foam. I fetched my sea-born treasures home, but the poor, unsightly, noisome things had left their beauty on the shore. With the sun and the sand and the wild uproar. The lover watched his graceful maid as mid the virgin train she stayed, nor knew her beauty's best attire was woven still in the snow-white choir. At last she came to his hermitage like the bird from the woodlands to the cage. The gay enchantment was undone, a gentle wife, but fairy none. Then I said, I covet truth. Beauty is unripe childhood's cheat. I leave it behind with the games of youth. As I spoke, beneath my feet the ground pine curled its pretty wreath, running over the club moss burrs. I inhaled the violet's breath. Around me stood the oaks and firs. Pine cones and acorns lay on the ground. Over me soared the eternal sky, full of light and deity. Again I saw, again I heard the rolling river, the morning bird. Beauty through my senses stole. I yielded myself to the perfect whole. And one more. Brahma. If the red slayer thinks he slays, Or if the slain think he is slain, they know not well the subtle ways I keep and pass and turn again. Far or forgot to me is near. Shadow and sunlight are the same. The vanished gods to me appear, and one to me are shame and fame. They reckon ill who leave me out. When me they fly, I am the wings. I am the doubter and the doubt. I am the hymn the Brahmin sings. The strong gods pine for my abode, and pine in vain the sacred seven. But thou, meek lover of the good, find me and turn thy back on heaven.
Thank you. Thank you very much. How wonderful. Maybe we can continue on like this. Oh, you were so successful. I know we can do this again. Maybe somebody who was influenced by Emerson, maybe somebody, though dead, has poetry still alive, maybe a woman. Let's give it a try. Emily Dickinson. Oh my goodness.
Just a little background and history about my life. I am Emily Dickinson. I was born in 1930 in Amherst, Massachusetts. My family was well known. My father, Edward, was a lawyer and treasurer of Amherst College, and my brother as well was a lawyer and treasurer of the college. My mother's was Emily Norcross Dickinson, and was known for her cooking skills. Something I never acquired. I had one sister, Lavinia, or Vinny, who is everyone I was not. She was outspoken and witty. She was a lot prettier than I was. But what I lacked in looks, I made up in imagination. It allowed me to go places where I have never been to. I suffered from major shyness that I never outgrew. I started writing poetry when I was a teen. At age 17, I entered the Mount Holyoke Seminary. My brother Austin wrote me letters and cheered me. Sadly, only 6 poems were published while I was alive, because nobody was interested in hearing about flowers, nature, the ocean. More poems were published upon my death in 1886, thanks to a man called Thomas Johnson, 1902 to 1985, who is widely regarded as a Dickinson scholar, who edited my letters as well in a book called Final Harvest. Nobody knows quite why I wrote, but it has been quoted about me that I seemed to know that there are wonderful possibilities in the most ordinary life if we just take notice. And one thing I will preface with is Emily did not title her poems. She just poured what was in her heart. And one, when I read, I'll just read what she wrote. I dwell in possibility, a fairer house than prose, more numerous of windows, superior of doors, of chambers as the cedars, impregnable of life, and for an everlasting roof, the gables of the sky. Of visitors, the fairest, for occupation this, the spreading of my narrow hands, together paradise. And there was one exception that I wrote and entitled In Requiem. It is one of my poems. However, I am dedicating this to my father. Could live, did live. Could die, did die. Could smile upon the whole, through faith in one he met not, to introduce his soul. Could go from scene familiar to an untraversed spot, could contemplate the journey with unpuzzled heart. Such trust had one among us not today. We who saw the launch never sailed the bay. The skies can't keep their secret. They tell it to the hills. The hills just told the orchards, and the daffodils. A bird by chance that goes that way, soft overhears the whole. If I should bribe the little bird, who knows what she would tell? I think I won't, however. It's finer not to know. If summer were an axiom, what sorcery had snow? So keep your secret, Father. I would not, even if I could, know what the sapphire fellows do in your new fashioned world.
Thank you, Emily. Well, let's evoke another poet born way back in the prior century. Oh no, wait, that's when we were born. The century before that. Maybe one that in all his goodness grew up in California, and in all his badness was born in Pennsylvania. Just kidding. I have somebody specific in mind, do you suppose? Okay. Are your fingers getting limber? Ooh, half eyes closed. Ooh. Ooh. No, you're supposed to come up here.
Oh, okay.
Mr. Jeffers, Mr. Robinson Jeffers. Welcome. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well.
Excellent.
Had a good dinner.
Fantastic.
Always good to be here at Gear Crash.
And you brought some poems with you.
A few.
Good.
A good friend of mine, who is also my publisher, wants me to turn this forward to some account. He says that a number of people have written pro and con about my verses, and it is high time for the author himself to say something. Very likely, but I do not wish to commend or defend them, though sufficiently attacked, and it seems to me that their meaning is not obscure. Perhaps a few notes about their origins may be of interest to anyone who is interested in the verses themselves. Long ago, before anything included here was written, it became evident to me that poetry, if it is to survive at all, must reclaim some of the power and reality that it was so hastily surrendering to prose. The modern French poetry of that time, and the most modern of the English poetry, seemed to me thoroughly defeatist, as if poetry were in terror of prose and desperately trying to save its soul from the victor by giving up its body. It was becoming slight and fantastic, abstract, unreal, eccentric, and was not even saving its soul, for these are generally anti-poetic qualities. It must reclaim substance and sense, and physical and psychological reality. This feeling has been basic in my mind since then. It led me to write narrative poetry and to draw subjects from contemporary life, to present aspects of life that modern poetry had generally avoided, and to attempt the expression of philosophic and scientific ideas in verse. It was not in my mind to open new fields for poetry, but only to reclaim old freedom. Still, it was obvious that poetry and prose are different things. Their provinces overlap, but must not be confused. Prose, of course, is free of all fields. It seemed to me, reading poetry and trying to write it, that poetry is bound to concern itself chiefly with permanent things and the permanent aspects of life. That was perhaps the great distinction between them as regards subject and material. Prose can discuss matters of the moment. Poetry must deal with things that a reader 2,000 years away would understand and be moved by. This excludes much of the circumstance of modern life, especially in cities. Fashions, forms of machinery, the more complex social, financial, political adjustments, and so forth, are all ephemeral, exceptional. They exist but will never exist again. Poetry must concern itself with relatively permanent things. These have poetic value. The ephemeral has only news value. Salmon fishing. The days shorten. The south blows wide for showers now. The south wind shouts to the rivers. The rivers open their mouths, and the salt salmon race up into the freshet. In Christmas month, against the smolder and menace of long angry sundown, red ash of the dark solstice, you see the anglers, pitiful, cruel, primeval, like the priests of the people that built Stonehenge, dark silent forms performing remote solemnities in the red shallows of the river's mouth at the year's turn, drawing landward their live bullion. The bloody mouths and scales full of the sunset twitch on the rocks, no more to wander at will the wild Pacific pasture, nor wanton and spawning race up into fresh water. Boats in a fog. Sports and gallantries, the stage, the arts, the antics of dancers, the exuberant voices of music, have charm for children but lack nobility. It is bitter earnestness that makes beauty. The mind knows, grown adult. A sudden fog drift muffled the ocean. A throbbing of engines moved in it. At length the stones throw out between the rocks and the vapor. One by one moved shadows out of the mystery. Shadows, fishing boats, trailing each other, following the cliff for guidance, holding a difficult path between the peril of the sea fog and the foam on the shore granite. One by one, trailing their leader, 6 crept by me, out of the vapor and into it. The throb of their engines subdued the fog, patient and cautious, coasting all around the peninsula, back to the buoys in Monterey Harbor. A flight of pelicans is nothing lovelier to look at. The flight of the planets is nothing nobler. All the arts lose virtue against the essential reality of creatures going about their business among the equally earnest elements of nature. Hurt hawks. The broken pillar of the wing jags from the clouded shoulder. The wing trails like a banner in defeat, no more to use the sky forever, but live with famine and pain a few days. Cat nor coyote will shorten the week of waiting for death. There is game without talons. He stands under the oak bush and waits the lame feet of salvation. At night he remembers freedom and flies in a dream. The dawn ruins it. He is strong, and pain is worse to the strong. Incapacity is worse. The curs of the day come and torment him at distance, but no one but death, the Redeemer, will humble that head. The intrepid readiness, the terrible eyes. The wild God of the world is sometimes merciful to those who ask mercy, not often to the arrogant. You do not know him, you communal people, or you have forgotten him. Intemperate and savage, the hawk remembers him. Beautiful and wild, the hawks and men that are dying remember him. I'd sooner, accept the penalties, kill a man than a hawk, but the great red tail had nothing left but unable misery from the bones too shattered for mending, the wing that trailed under his talons when he moved. We had fed him 6 weeks. I gave him freedom. He wandered over the foreland hill and returned in the evening asking for death. Not like a beggar, still-eyed with the old implacable arrogance. I gave him the lead gift in the twilight. What fell was relaxed, owl downy, soft feminine feathers, but what soared, the fierce rush. The night herons by the flooded river cried fear at its rising before it was unsheathed from reality. Bixby's Landing. They burned lime on the hill and dropped it down here in an iron car on a long cable. Here the ships warped in and took their loads from the engine. The water is deep to the cliff. The car hangs halfway over in the gape of the gorge, stationed like a north star above the peaks of the redwoods, iron perch for the little red hawks when they cease from hovering, when they've struck prey. The spider's fling of a cable, rust glued to the pulleys. The laborers are gone, but what a good multitude is here in return. The rich lichened rock, the rose-tipped stone crop, the constant ocean's voices, the cloud-lighted space. The kilns are cold on the hill, but here in the rust of the broken boiler, quick lizards lighten, and a rattlesnake flows down the cracked masonry, over the crumbled fire brick. In the rotting timbers and roofless platforms, all the free companies of windy grasses have root and make seed. Wild buckwheat blooms in the fat, weather-slacked lime from the bursted barrels. 2 duckhawks darting in the sky of their cliff-hung nest are the voice of the headland. Wine-hearted solitude, our mother the wilderness. Men's failures are often as beautiful as men's triumphs, but your returnings are even more precious than your first presents. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jeffers. That oohing is getting a little scary, isn't it? Maybe well, for those of you real Ghostbusters, please continue, but for the poets and all, just wiggle those fingers. Yeah, I think we've got some momentum here with the dead poets. Out in the midst, I see Muriel Rukeyser.
Good evening. I've come so far for such a short while to be here tonight. I will tell you some things about my life in a short time. Let me take my gloves off. It's too warm in here. Okay. I know you want to know about my childhood and where I came from. I'm from New York and born in 1913. You can read in my poems that I listened to beautiful music by Chopin and by my widowed aunt. And I viewed the ugliness of black and burnt wasteland from my father developing villages, he called them, on the East Coast. So I grew up with contradictions from an early age. And that helped me to develop my social consciousness.